Good afternoon, good evening, everyone, wherever you are. My name is IACCP, and together with Amber Guile-Fellmeyer, I'm delighted to welcome you to the first editors panel in this Congress. There will be other ones hosted on different days, in which we're hosting editors of 3 journals of the Society for Personality and Social Psychology, so SPSP. Lots of acronyms are coming our way. So the idea of putting this panel together originated in the discussions that we had at the meetings of the SPSP International Committee, which I'm currently co-chairing with Aran Oranzayan, and I will be joined by Amber as the upcoming co-chair starting September. So in the SPSP International Committee, we have been working towards taking steps to help increase geographical diversity in our science, both in terms of researchers who does the research and the populations that are studied. And especially so in outlets that fall under the responsibility of organizations that are located in North America, and SPSP is one of them. So SPSP hosts PSPR, Personality and Social Psychology Review, PSPB, Personality and Social Psychology Bulletin, and SPPS, Social Psychology and Personality Science. The last one is hosted in collaboration with other associations in social and personality psychology. So as most of you would know, these are some of the top journals in personality and social psychological science, and most of us try to publish in them. So we invited the editors of PSPR, SPPS, and PSPV to first of all share with us information about the journals they edit. What are their goals? What kinds of pieces do they welcome? And what makes a successful submission? And also some of the observations they might have had during their term when it comes to submissions from different parts of the world. We also would be curious to hear what they think in terms of why it is important to work towards diversifying our science, why they, what they as editors have done to do so, and what else they think can be done in the future. So we're not limited to these questions in any way, and I'm sure there will be lots of other questions coming their way at the end of the session. So without taking too much time, I would like to give the floor first to Jonathan Adler, the editor of PSPR. I believe he took over the journal last January. We will then have other editors following him. Our session is scheduled for 1.5 hours, which means we will have plenty of time for questions after we have listened to our speakers. Before we start, I would like to give the word to Amber to say a few words, but before doing so, I also would like to thank Emma, the program chair for the Congress, and other members of the organizing committee who have been extremely accommodating when it comes to this session and the timing of it to make it fit to all of us. So Amber, first you, and then Jonathan will start with you.
Okay, I think Aisha's introduction really covered it. And the only thing I want to add is to just really encourage everyone. We've made a lot of space here in this session for people to ask questions and make comments. You know, what kind of things do you wish you knew in trying to publish in these as an international author trying to publish in an American-based journal? What kind of questions, what kind of comments do you have? I hope everyone will feel very free to speak up.
Thank you. Jonathan, the floor is yours.
Fantastic. Thank you. Yeah, first of all, just thank you so much for putting this together and inviting us to do this, Isa, and also to Amber. And thanks to all of you who are here. It's really nice to get an opportunity to speak to the IACCP community. So I really appreciate you inviting us to the Congress and taking the time. So we, as a group, decided that we would try to make this as interactive a session as possible. So I think the 3 of us are each going to try to keep our sort of prepared remarks to a minimum. But we were asked to tell you a little bit about our journals and some, some things to think about when thinking about submitting to our journal. So that's what I'll do. And I just want to say also that it's so great to get to join Margot and Michael, who are doing such wonderful things with the other SPSP journals. This really is a great time to publish in personality and social psychology. So it's always a treat to get to share space with the 2 of them. Okay, so PSPR is different from the other two journals in that it is really a journal aimed at advancing new theory. We don't publish primary empirical studies. It's an opportunity for review papers that really advance the theoretical perspective on the field. I want to tell you about the journal. As Isa said, my editorial team just started in January, so we're still very much in startup mode. But a lot of what I want to say today is captured at more length in our journal's editorial philosophy, which I'm putting into the chat right now. This is a longer statement that we put out in January when we first took over. And some of the things that I'm going to say here are captured here, though I'll try to give you some updates on how things have evolved. Okay, so this session was designed as part of a broader effort that we've been taking at PSPR to really try to cultivate a broader authorship for the journal. So this session is one among other efforts that we've been making, including we've done so far one session at another conference, and we've sent emails to 47 professional organizations of all different types, really trying to invite people to submit to PSPR who might not have otherwise thought to do so. So at the most recent meeting of the Society for Personality and Social Psychology in February, we did a session called PSPR is for you, and we really mean that. So let me tell you a little bit about where we're taking the journal since we started in January. We've made a really intentional effort to foster an editorial team that looks like the future of the field that we want to see. So in addition to myself, there are 4 associate editors for the journal. I'm putting the link here into the chat so you can see a little bit more information about who the 4 of us are, including Amber, who helped organize this session. What I think is important to know about the 5 of us, the 4 associate editors and myself, is that we are all what I call hyphenated academics. So we are all either personality or social psychologists, and we are clinical psychologists, health psychologists, environmental psychologists, cultural psychologists. That was a very intentional decision to try to recruit an editor team that really looks at the breadth of the field and that is really interested in the intersections between personality and social psychology and other fields. So coming to speak here at the Congress feels like actually a natural fit, very aligned with what we're trying to do with the journal. And one thing that we are also doing that isn't so visible is that we're really working as a coordinated, collaborative team. This is not a transactional hierarchy. The 4 associate editors and I meet quite regularly. We have collaboratively developed the editorial philosophy, and we're working on refining a lot of our processes as a collaborative team. In addition to the 5 of us, we have an editorial board, as all journals do. We have an 81-person editorial board. And here again, we have made an effort to really intentionally cultivate a slate of brilliant scholars who represent the kind of field that we'd like to see in the future. So I have some stats here to share with you. There are 81 people on our editorial board. They are 23% people who work outside of North America, Western Europe, and Australia and New Zealand. They are scholars on every continent except Antarctica. And there are also folks who work outside of academia. So that has been a really concerted effort to try to broaden the geographical representation at our journal. We are also, let me get the stats, we are 52% women identified, including 2% either transgender or non-binary. We are 56% people who identify as something other than white or Caucasian, recognizing that those labels don't always translate globally. It's 22% people who identify as something other than straight or heterosexual, 1% people who identify as having a disability, but 100% people doing amazing research. So we have really quite a diverse and intentionally diverse editorial board. These will be the people who are the first line reviewers for your submissions. They are our go-to reviewers, and we're just so thrilled to have them on the team. We've also taken a rather unusual step in getting started up in that we have also cultivated what we are calling an emerging editor board. Our thought is that the pipeline for future associate editors and editors ought to begin as early as possible. So our editorial board represent people that we are hoping to get ready to step right into associate editor positions at other journals. And our emerging editor board are folks one step behind them in their career trajectory. These are advanced graduate students and postdocs who are really interested in the process of handling manuscripts, learning about the reviewing process. So through a competitive application process, we recruited an 80-member emerging editor board, really in an effort to cultivate the editorial pipeline. So these are, get the stats, they are 40% people outside of North America, Western Europe, Australia, and New Zealand, again, representing every continent, except we don't have Africa and Antarctica represented. They're 55% women identified, 3% transgender and non-binary, 38% people who identify as something other than white or Caucasian, again, recognizing the limitations of those labels globally. 28% people who identify as something other than straight or heterosexual, 9% people who identify as having a disability. So again, a really diverse set of people who are really committed to this process. Every manuscript that we handle will be assigned to someone on the emerging editor board. The handling associate editor will know who that is, but the authors won't, because their perspective ought to sit nicely beside the other peer review perspectives. But the associate editor will provide these members of the emerging editorial board with developmental feedback on their reviews. That'll be a private exchange between the emerging editor board member and the associate editor, but really trying to help those folks learn how to be good reviewers and good editors. So in addition to, so that's sort of the team, that's the PSPR team. And I just want to say that we really take the cultivation of a diverse authorship very seriously. So we are doing outreach efforts like this to try to welcome people to submit to the journal. We're also in the process of conducting a big archival project where we're tracking the demographic characteristics of every author who's published in PSPR since 1997 when the journal was launched. That's a big process, an IRB approved process. We're using a methodology that was found in a paper published in Perspectives on Psych Science by Michael Robinson and colleagues looking at racial representation in journals. I've been in touch with them about the methodology. We're using a very similar methodology. That's still very much in process. But it will, once it's done, we'll have a real foundation of understanding who's published in this journal historically, and that will give us a baseline to start to understand if we're being successful in cultivating a different kind of authorship going forward. We're doing some work now with SAGE to try to figure out the best way to track the demographic characteristics of currently submitting authors. So what do we want? We want your best theory papers. We are interested in interdisciplinary work, that especially work that focuses on the most pressing social issues of today, things like climate change, political polarization, systemic racism, global inequity, many, many other things. If you are thinking deeply about these things, we are really interested to hear your thoughts. We do take meta-analyses and systematic reviews, but if those methods are only deployed in sort of a summative way, then it's not the right fit. There are other journals that are really good outlets for sort of straightforward, we did a systematic review or a meta-analysis or a scoping review to understand the field. Here are our results. For us, we really needed to go a step further. Simply summarizing the field is not far enough. We are really interested in catalyzing new fields of inquiry and new theoretical insights. So it's great if you've got a foundation that's a meta-analysis or a systematic review, though it's certainly not required. The vast majority of submissions to PSPR are not meta-analyses and systematic reviews. What we care about is that you are actually advancing theory. So if you summarize a field, whether you do that using one of those quantitative tools or in a more narrative, qualitative way, you then have to ask yourself, so what? What does this mean for the field? What new insight have I derived? How can I build on this foundation to open up new windows into the most pressing, most important questions going forward? And I will just close by saying that we're really interested in cultivating a truly global authorship. We are really interested in perspectives that have not been represented well in sort of the dominant personality and social psychology journals. And often those perspectives come from folks working in different kinds of contexts. So we are very, very interested in receiving your work. We know that you can open us to new ideas and new windows that we haven't seen in the literature before. So please, please consider submitting your theory work to PSPR. So I will wrap up there to hand it off for introductions from Margot and Michael, but I'm really, really looking forward to active dialogue with you. I'm interested in taking your questions about anything. So I'll look forward to that conversation in a bit. Thanks.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you so much. This was a wonderful introduction to the new editorial team and its vision in terms of where you would like to see the journal go. So thank you very much for that. So our next speaker is Margot Monteith from SPPS. And we'd like to hear her views about the journal and more generally about diversifying our science. SPPS is a slightly different journal to PSPR, definitely, but also PSPB. So it's going to be interesting to hear from her. Margot, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Isa. I'm going to share my screen. I do have some slides prepared. Is everyone, are you seeing that all right? Cool. All right, so social, psychological, and personality science is the journal that I edit. I've been doing so for 3 years. I have 353 days left on my term. So 4-year term, 4 years is quite a while. The journal has just, you know, it just continues to grow in submissions, and as I'll talk a little bit in its ability to publish high quality papers. So at present, the impact factor is 5.32 for the annual impact factor. The 5-year impact factor is 6.33. And this journal is very unique because it is not one society that weighs in on how it operates. It's multiple societies, and not just in the United States. So the Association for Research and Personality, the European Association of Social Psychology, Society for Experimental Social Psychology, and Society for Personality and Social Psychology all have representatives on a consortium. And this consortium reviews everything that's going on with the journal. I report to the consortium regularly. They have input from all of their organizations and society associations into journal policy. And so all have a voice. In addition, the journal is also sponsored by the Asian Association for Social Psychology and the Society for Australasian Social Psychologists. So really, it is a global journal just by virtue of the societies and associations that are involved in kind of overseeing it. Our lead team includes 14 people. So myself, and I was recently able to add 2 co-editors, as well as 11 associate editors. And what you can see from this list is we have folks from across, across the world. So 7 of the lead team are members, are individuals who are not from the United States and represent different continents. In addition, we have about a 100-person board editorial board. And this includes scholars from countries other than the United States. Over half of the board has individuals outside of North America. So so we really do have a global representation on the leadership and the editorial board. So what do we publish? SPSS is unique in that it's a short report journal, but that doesn't mean that the research going into it is like one study done and that goes to SPPS. You're still going to see programs of research published in the journal. So most frequently more than one study. Hopefully the second study is providing some generalizability across different types of samples or cultures, and also some replicability. Sometimes you'll see as many as 6 studies, but that's really pushing it for this short report journal. It's aimed to publish these concise reports of empirical studies, so it's empirically focused, that provide meaningful contributions to understanding of important issues in social and personality psychology. So it strives to publish innovative, rigorous, and impactful research. Much like psychological science, SPPS has this short report format, 5,000 words or less. And it really focuses on publishing work that's not sexy. Not at all sexy. It's founded in theory. It builds on theory. It's very theoretically focused. But research that's really gonna appeal to a broad audience of social and personality psychologists and beyond. SPPS research is often picked up by the popular press. And really it's designed to inform the public in addition to the scientific scholars in our field. So you may present new theory, new data, new methods, or any combination of these. And we do consider also strong replication studies, including failed replications, especially but not exclusively as studies published in SPPS. The journal is geared toward a speedy review and publication process to allow groundbreaking research. I know that's a buzzword, but really this is for research that's really taking a big step, either theoretically or empirically, to become part of the scientific conversation and to do so quickly. So the research should be grounded in theory. Now, do you have to have a brand new whole theory like you would for certain publication outlets? No, not at all. But there should be some contribution to theory in addition to the rigorous empirical aspect of the research. So preference is given to articles that represent an advance to social, psychological, or personality or personality science, that are methodologically rigorous, that have theoretical and practical significance. We want to know, what does this mean for the real world, for people in the real world, that helps to build interdisciplinary bridges among areas in social and personality psychology, and that are written to be accessible to wide ranges of audiences, including science writers and the popular press. In terms of details for the articles, they cannot exceed 5,000 words. Now, scholars are more and more relying on supplemental online materials to include that extra study or to include all these additional analyses, and sometimes the supplementary online materials can be just as long as the articles themselves, and that's okay. That's a beauty of having supplemental online materials that we can upload and access, but the articles themselves are limited to 5,000 words. And so we try to process the manuscripts very quickly. The time from submission to the first decision is around 40 days. And excluding desk rejections, those are ones that aren't manuscripts that are not sent out to review. The time is on average around 50 days. We publish 8 issues annually, but we have with Sage what's called a flexible page budget. And that was introduced last year. And this means that, hey, if we have more than, say, 10 articles, so normally an issue would consist of about 10 to 12 manuscripts. With this flexible page budget, we can have 20 manuscripts. We can have as many pages as we want per each of the 8 issues. And so this allows us to publish as much high quality research as we can get. And the time from acceptance to online publication is about 45 days. So things move quite quickly at the journal. And here I would just give thanks. I mean, many of you who are attending and so many people in the field, you know, are such fantastic reviewers for the journal. We don't just rely on the editorial board. And even, you know, it's been difficult, right? It's been difficult across the last couple of years to review papers and to do so in this kind of expedited fashion. But we've had just, you know, still tremendous participation from reviewers across the globe. And we give, you know, if folks need longer to do reviews, given what's been going on in their lives, we certainly do accept that, you know. So sometimes it might take longer than 50 days for you to get submission feedback, but we're pretty timely. We pretty much are at level 2 in terms of transparency and openness promotion, the top standards. And I fully expect that with a new editor, SPPS will fully be requiring that level 2 top standards be met. When I started 3 years ago, and I was doing the planning even longer ago, we weren't quite ready to jump in fully to level 2. So we have a little bit of leniency there. But I am sure that the next editor will be having level 2 standards. So you need to provide links to all study materials currently, post data code and codebook to the repository according to level 2. At present, we very strongly encourage this. Most people do it. But with the new editor, I think this will be required. There is adherence to design transparency standards and reporting all measures. The article states whether pre-registration exists and provides links. And we really do like to see pre-registration, at least for, you know, one of the studies, you know, maybe not in an initial study, and then a follow-up study is presented that does include pre-registration. And replications are encouraged. At present, we don't conduct results blind review of these replications, meaning we don't review a proposal for the replication independent of the results initially, but I suspect that'll be the case when the new editor comes on in a year. Let me show you this map here. I ran analyses within the journal's database from when I started in July 2019 until present. And here you see manuscript submissions. So we have a good number of submissions, yes, from the United States. In the last year, it was 33%. But we have many other countries represented. I know this, you can't read this terribly clearly, but I think you can make out a lot, and you see that, you know, many countries across continents are represented in submissions. In terms of manuscripts published, when they ran this since July 2019, to present. 55% of the first authors identified themselves as not being located in the United States, to be outside of the United States. So we do pretty well publishing globally with global representation. I think we can do better. And so opportunities such as this to talk about the journal are especially welcomed. I also did an analysis of how many manuscripts accepted between July 9, 2019 and present had the word culture or cultural or cross-cultural in the title, and saw that 12.4% had one of these three in the title. And so we also have, I think, quite a good representation of cross-cultural, cultural-related publications focusing on the role of culture. And of course, many other manuscripts that don't have it in the title could have explored the role of culture. As I indicated, we do often encourage collection of data, beyond just certain samples. So I guess I'll wrap it up. I want to thank you and just say that we're looking forward to receiving your submissions at the journal.
Thank you very much, Margot, for sharing your thoughts about the journal and how it operates and its goals. Now we're moving on to the editor of PSPB, Michael Robinson. Michael, the floor is yours.
Yeah, hi, Michael Robinson. I'm also a hyphen type psychologist. I'm social personality emotion psychologist, so pretty broad in what I study. PSPB is a SPSP journal, not other associations, so it's just SPSP. PSPB is a primary outlet for empirical papers in social personality psychology. Typically, the papers have to be 10,000 words or fewer, although we do allow for 11,000 at revision stage. It's actually not stated on the website, but we allow about 1,000 extra words. Multiple studies are typical, so there typically are more than one study. We get about 600 submissions a year, and of those, we publish about 120 per year. And this is in all areas of social personality psychology, such as stereotypes and prejudice, attitudes, behavior, ideology, morality, social identity, self, personality, culture, motivation, emotion, organizational behavior, relationships. So it is really, it's the whole field, basically, that is covered by the journal. I do favor diversity of articles, article types, samples, and data from diverse regions of the world. So I did copy the editorial statement, and there is a statement on diversity in there. And we say that contributions will come in many forms. There's no single litmus test that's applied in distinguishing publishable from non-publishable papers. Some papers are going to examine existing theory, others will emphasize methodological development, some will be oriented toward novelty, others toward replication. Some will involve experiments, others will not involve experiments. Some will focus on real world phenomena such as experience sampling studies or the study of real world behavior. Some will involve collection of new data, while others will capitalize on the use of existing data from larger panel studies, often in the context of greater representativeness. Submissions can include meta-analyses, replications, alternatives to null hypothesis significance testing, single as well as multiple studies. They're all considered. So I think we're kind of a big boat. We're a large boat, and we intend to service the whole field of social personality psychology. We started a year and a half ago. So I've got 3 co-editors, Yen Ho, Emily Impit, and Ben Wilkowski, who are quite excellent. And so we're a year and a half old. Now, when we started, we were primarily charged with instantiating top 2 criteria. So this is something that Margot was talking about, how things were in flux about 3 years ago, and now SPSP wanted us to instantiate the top 2 criteria. So you'll see on the website that PSPB now requires authors to make data analytic code verbatim research materials available to reviewers at the time of submission. That is done through links that are links to external, like OSF project sites that are included in the paper. So the reviewer, and those have to be blind though. When you submit, you can't have like the authors identified, but reviewers can sort of follow along the path and find the files if they want. Authors are also required to specify whether studies and analysis plans are pre-registered or not pre-registered. And if they are pre-registered, then you make those links available upon, well, when you submit. And when the paper is published, then people de-anonymize various materials, and those materials will be available to readers. We also sought, so, primarily what we were charged with was the instantiation of the top 2 criteria, top standing for transparency and openness guidelines. So we also sought to diversify the journal in various ways. We had an open call to associate editors when we were picking and recruiting associate editors. That open call said that PSPB has a diverse staff of editors by area, interest, region, gender, age, race, ethnicity, and we welcome nominations that speak to that diversity. We made an open call to a variety of listservs, including the Relationship Group, the Personality Group, SPSP, European Association of Social Psychology, Society for Psychological Study of Social Issues. We also talked to so basically I had an opportunity to, to sort of redo the staff. And at the time that we redid the staff, we were thinking about diversity. We also talked to the SPSP International Committee for names to consider in diversifying the editorial board and associate editor level. And they gave me lots of names, including scholars in Africa, Middle East, India. We ended up generating like 300 names for associate editor and editorial board thoughts. One of the things that I did was I trimmed, so we were up to, the editorial board was up to about 160, I believe, under Chris Crandall's editorship. And yeah, it was very large, yeah. So the first thing I did was I got stats on whether those people were reviewing papers for the journal. And there were lots of people who were not reviewing anything for the journal. Like the one person got 10 invitations to review papers from the journal that she was on the editorial board, and she declined every single one of them. So we called the editorial board back to about 100, and that got us that gave us the opportunity to add, and we added additional board members who are either excellent reviewers. We had some stats on sort of reviewers, and or who bolstered representation across expertise areas, geographical regions, career stage, race, ethnic groups, gender identification. So those were things that we did think about. I did include a link to the editorial statement for the journal, and you can see that that there are several statements concerning diversity that are part of the editorial philosophy statement. So we know that SPSP and PSPB both value diversity as a core value. So we like when scholars bring historically underrepresented perspectives to science, social psychology, and it mentions the open call to sort of diversify the various areas that we have. And we also said that we welcome submissions involving underrepresented populations. authors should be given, this is a statement I stole from Lynn Cooper. When I was at JPSP, she had this statement that I liked. Authors should be given credit rather than penalized for efforts to obtain unique samples, whether with respect to age, ethnicity, geographical location, or other participant characteristics. Moreover, we encourage authors to think about constraints on generality. Our efforts concerning diversity were, well, largely successful, I guess. Our managing editor is in India. Our production editor is in India. The associate editors, we have about 27 of them. About 27. One's from Canada, 2 are from Italy, 1 from Japan, 1 from Netherlands, 1 from Portugal, 1 from Singapore, 1 from the United Kingdom. The editorial board is now at about 120, so it's cut back off of the previous one, but it's growing now. So we can add, I can add people whenever I want. So if there's additional people that you would that you think would be good to add, we can definitely do so. That's one of the perks. I can just add people whenever I want. So the editorial board has 7 people from Australia, 1 Belgium, 1 Brazil, 9 Canada, 1 China, 1 Germany, 3 Israel, 3 Italy, 1 Malaysia, 2 New Zealand, 1 Scotland, 1 Singapore, 4 Netherlands, 1 United Kingdom. We're pretty balanced with regard to gender. So at the editor, co-editor level, there's 2 males, 2 females. At the associate editor level, there's 13 males and 12 females. And then at the editorial board level, it's 64 females and 53 females. Okay, now I was going to brag about the number of papers that are coming from countries other than the United States, but Margot has the same stats as I do, so I can't really brag about it too much. Let me just say that in 2021, we received papers where the first author was from 47 different countries or regions, and that only a minority of papers was the first author actually from the United States. So that was 34.1, which is very similar to the about 33 stat that she had. 5 to 10% is Netherlands, Canada, Germany. Well, the most frequent is the United States, but then 5 to 10 is Netherlands, Canada, Germany, United Kingdom, China. 1 to 5 is Belgium, Japan, Sweden, India, Italy, Korea, Turkey, Singapore, Spain, Australia, Poland, and Israel. And then, several papers per year coming from places like Cyprus, Indonesia, Jordan, Morocco, Slovakia, Portugal, Hungary, Iran, Romania, Saudi Arabia, Pakistan, and Malaysia. So as far as the manuscripts that are coming in, they're really coming in from all over the world. So I think in general, PSPB we get a lot of submissions, and we really want to be inclusive of the whole world when it comes to social personality psychology. So I think for the most part, that seems to be happening. So I'm happy about that, I guess. And that's really all I have.
Thank you very much, Michael. We appreciate your contribution. Great to hear about these 3 journals, what they have done so far, and the vision, especially in the case of PSPR, because it's a relatively new editorial board. So it is now time to take questions from the audience. I think it would be best if you could, if you're in a position to ask your question yourself rather than putting it in the chat, so we can make this a little bit more interactive. If you have any questions, please raise your hand, and then I should be able to call you and hopefully in some sort of correct order, and then you can unmute yourself and ask your question. I saw Lucy raising her hand. Lucy, please ask your question.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. Thanks so much, Aisha, and everyone else who participated. I think this is really helpful and useful for everyone to see what the journals are actually looking for, and to hear that it does seem like we are moving towards more diversification. So that's a really nice, nice to see all those reports on where you are getting your submissions from. The question I had was about theory papers, so I think it's probably most relevant to Jonathan. I think everyone knows that it's very difficult to publish theory papers to begin with, but since PSPR is specifically focused on that, I wanted to ask something. I haven't tried submitting to PSPR yet. I'm aspiring to one day, but I do have some early career colleagues around me who did try that, and the one case that I was curious about, it was a rejection. The reviews were really nice, but the reason why it was rejected was that there was not enough empirical evidence yet, which seemed very surprising to me because that's the point of a theoretical paper, kind of. It proposes a theory and doesn't have to provide evidence yet. And to be fair, it was the previous editorial board, so it wasn't during the new editorial board membership. So yeah, I was curious in general, what do you think about theoretical papers, how to publish them, how to write them, especially if you're an early career scholar and you don't have the program built up yet, but you still want to get the ideas out. So any advice on that would be appreciated. Thanks.
You bet. Thank you for the question, and thanks for your interest. I hope you will work on a theory paper too. I mean, so I think you're right. I think that theory papers are actually great papers for early career people to focus on, because so much of early career is about getting a handle on the field. One of our real interests in having an emerging editor board was because these are folks who are deeply immersed in the cutting edge of the literature. They're really paying attention because they're getting up to speed in the way that very senior people sometimes aren't always reading everything that's coming out. And also often experiences in graduate school or early career encourage you to write things that look like theory papers. So literature reviews, sometimes for qualifying exams, people write something that looks like a theory paper or a review. So we love hearing from early career folks. Across all three journals, SPSP gives a graduate student publication award for best papers published with graduate student first authors. So we get a little flag in the system for early career papers, and I always get excited when I see that. So we very much encourage, I think this is a good thing for early career people to think on, to work on, and also I think it's very clarifying to try to consolidate your ideas. Okay, now to the heart of your question. I think there is this delicate balance. So we are very much interested in folks who can sort of see a new frontier that hasn't been articulated yet. And that means, by definition, there isn't a huge empirical foundation for it. But there's a line where it starts to become purely speculative. And I think what you're trying to do is really walk this dance between what has been and what might be. So it is incumbent upon you to be able to articulate the ways in which your new theoretical insights build on a foundation that exists in the field. Now, that might point to some very particular deficit in the current landscape in the field. So it might say, you know, the entire field has been asking these kinds of questions with these kinds of samples. But when we look at a different kind of sample for which there's only a few studies, we start to get different answers. I'm really I have some ideas about what that discrepancy is about. So there may be a broad foundation over here and a relatively thin one over here. And my work is about helping us take that broad foundation and look towards a new horizon or something like that. So I think we do, PSPR is a very competitive journal. We get many wonderful papers that we just can't accept. So no one should feel like, oh, I didn't get my paper into PSPR, it's not good. No, and in fact, our editor as a team, we often talk about, oh man, these are all so good, I wish we could take all of them. So I think the question about is the foundation strong enough is, am I using what foundation is out there to say something really new? And either that's recasting what's known, or it's looking towards a deficit in the field, or it's putting things together in an integrative way that looks towards a new future. But yeah, it can't be purely speculative, because then it doesn't quite feel like theory yet. It really is like an idea. It hasn't been in dialogue with real data yet. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, thanks. That's very helpful. Thank you.
Do we have other questions from the audience? While we're waiting for more, I have one, if that's okay. So I think this is more for the journals that publish empirical work. So one difficulty in a way that a lot of folks that do comparative work, cross-cultural, cross-national work is the amount of effort that it takes. Coordinating data collection, working with different collaborators in different parts of the world, dealing with translations. It's just running one study in different contexts is a lot of work, as you all know. Sometimes researchers that work in that comparative field can get reviews back or decisions back saying, well, this is all great, but we haven't done this, you haven't done that, you haven't actually looked at this aspect of that research question. So I think my question is about how do you strike a balance between a completeness in a manuscript, in the sense that it tells a complete story across different studies, versus the amount of diversity that it brings by virtue of having conducted that study in multiple contexts. We have, a colleague of mine recently got a paper rejected. I think it was, I can't remember, maybe one of you or another journal, I can't remember. But it was 3 different studies with multinational samples. And the review said, well, we don't know about this yet. Oh, sure, that will take me another 3 years to run that study. So what, I think in some ways, where does the weight go, when you're making decisions? What is valued more, the completeness, or, the diversity that the data bring, or the novelty, when you encounter papers like this? I hope I could make myself clear. So that's for Michael and Margot more, I guess. Thank you.
Okay, I guess I did have one thought, which is that, well, if the paper is doing something cross-culturally, if that is a large component of what it's doing, then hopefully we would find an editor for that paper who would welcome sort of the effort involved in collecting those kinds of data, right? So, so if you sent, if something took 3 or 5 years to collect all that data with all that organization, I think somebody who is a cultural psychologist would appreciate that aspect of it, and that would bode better for the publication or for the chances of publication, relative to sending it to somebody who's in a topic area who doesn't particularly care about the cultural comparison aspects. So I think primarily it would be a matter of finding an associate editor who cares about the diversity of the samples and the comparisons that are being made. At least that's my thought on it.
Thank you.
Yeah, I agree with Michael. Who handles it is really important. So at SPPS, a couple of our associate editors, but Yuri Miyamoto especially, is handled a lot of cross-cultural work, but other associate editors as well. We want to make sure that the people handling it, as well as the reviewers, can appreciate the unique contribution that such research can make to the field, and the importance, the significance of such work. You know, at the same time, if a critical feature of the research is missing, you know, if that's the case, then yeah, additional data may be requested. I would encourage cross-cultural researchers who get feedback that they need to do, you know, you should add this or you should add that, and are like, oh, great, you know, I can't do this unless I spend 3 or 4 more years on this research, and who believe they already have a strong package, to come back and to challenge the handling editor, or to go straight to the editor. So in the case of SPPS, to come to me. There are, in the editorial that was published when I started, as well as in the philosophy that I communicate to our editorial team, we value, the journal values research that is difficult to conduct. And difficult to conduct research may not be as thorough as easy to conduct research in some respects. And for the very reasons that you identified. So yeah, I would go back and challenge it.
Thank you.
I want to just throw one really quick thing in. Even though we don't publish empirical research in PSPR, one of the phrases that we have in the template email that goes out to reviewers with review requests, because I think it's especially seductive with theory papers, you could tack on you can throw in a million things. One thing we encourage reviewers to do is think about, what is the best version that this paper can be? Not to what do I want to see this paper to be, but what is the best version of this paper? And then if we envision how far does it have to go to be the best version of itself, is that then appropriate for our journal? So I do think there's something about cultivating an editorial culture where reviewers are oriented toward the task ahead of them. There is no such thing as the perfect paper. And no journal, no matter how competitive, is only publishes perfect papers, because they don't exist. So we try to ask reviewers to think about, what is the best version of this paper? And then, is that appropriate for our journal?
I want to jump in and add something to Margot's answer to this, because I really agree with that it can be really important for authors to challenge. And I met with I was a visiting scholar in Malaysia, and met with a group of people there about publishing in international journals. And I was hearing a lot of people were expressing a lot of frustration that they'd had experiences that they'd submitted to top journals, not necessarily these journals, no journal names were named, but they'd submitted some of these really high impact journals, and they had gotten decisions back saying, oh, your data's from Malaysia, you should publish in a Malaysian journal or something, you know, how does this generalize? And I could really sympathize that, yeah, that's not right. That's a bias. Like, people, there's a lot of arguments you can make that people in Malaysia are more representative of the world's population than people from the United States, but it's a bias that exists. And what I really encourage people to do is exactly that: stand up for yourself, you know, write back to the editor, make your case, get it into your paper. Eventually, someday, maybe you shouldn't have to, and we can have a long argument about why you shouldn't have to, but because that bias is there, just, you know, cite some things. And there's a lot of things out there showing that this bias exists, and make a case for how your sample is representative, things like that. So I think it's really important for authors to kind of help yourself, help educate editors, and keep kind of pushing that forward.
Thank you. Plamen, you have a question, please.
Yes, I wanted to follow up on this topic because it really got my interest, and about challenging the editor, but also it relates so well to the topic of diversity. And my case is exactly that. I submitted the paper and I did very extensive literature review, and I showed that there were 10 papers from the US on this topic and another 5 from Western Europe. And there was literally no from East Asia. I wanted to fill this gap, and I very explicitly mentioned that. And then the paper was rejected, and one of the reviewer basically the only concern was that the paper doesn't make significant contribution. And I really felt very compelled to actually challenge the editor. But I was actually advised by my mentors that this is in general not a good idea. And it typically doesn't lead to any positive outcome. So I wanted to actually ask you if that is in any case advisable.
So I can comment first. One doesn't want to go around challenging every decision. I'm not talking about making a practice of it, but when there is a bias in the field, and I still hear way too often of this happening, where the example that Amber was given, like where the data were collected, say in Malaysia, and just because of that, it's assumed not to be representative. Whereas if it's conducted, on MTurk in the United States only, it's assumed to be representative. I mean, come on, so in cases where there's a real bias that's this kind of bias, I think that confronting, challenging is highly appropriate. Yeah, so I would encourage it in the kinds of instances that we're talking about. Now, I mean, I don't know your paper and whether the addition of the Asian sample, how much that contributed, whether there was any question about whether it would generalize, or how strong of a case you were able to make for the importance of establishing this generalization. That would be key for a journal like SPPS, because it's simply showing that there is generalization without there being a question of, is there reason to believe it might not generalize? So it's simply showing, that this replicates in this sample. That's not going to be as high of a level of contribution as would be expected for this particular journal. For another journal, probably, but so it is the case that the journal standards need to be considered carefully, as well. But in a challenge, in a response, an answer can be, you can get that answered. I'll also say that although I encourage, everyone on the team to take this approach, maybe not everybody does uniformly. I can't check all of the decision letters going out there, so again, I had mentioned, maybe going to the editor themselves in cases where you feel like there's a real bias that's operating.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, I think that if there is a bias, it's a calling card that you don't want to play every time you get rejected, because it's just a fact of our field, right? I get rejected all the time. I get rejected once a week probably, and it's just part of the game. But if you do encounter a case where it just doesn't seem fair why it's being rejected, then that's these are the cases in which you pull that card and you appeal it. But yeah, you don't want to, I would say it would be, for me, it's about 1 out of 10 maybe, where I write a note to the editor and say, this is not the right decision process for this paper. But it's, I'm not going to do it every time for sure.
Thank you. There's also a question in the chat. I don't know whether the editors have had a chance to read it. I think Michael did, because he put his response there. Is there anything that Margot or Margot, you would like to add to that question? So it's about top guidelines, whether
Yeah, I was just starting to type a response. I think that definitely top guidelines in adopting those have improved journal, the quality of the manuscripts in the journal. You know, I know this isn't necessarily strictly a top thing, but considering the size of samples, that's a huge improvement. You know, sometimes we can't get larger samples because we're studying a sample that is very underrepresented, and then that should be all right. But a lot of the times papers are being published with samples that are just too small, where the materials weren't provided, and so we didn't know exactly what all participants were doing in the studies, where we didn't have access, you know, to be able to look at actually how the data were explored. It's just the quality is improving a lot, I believe.
Thank you. And Lucy is asking whether editors read cover letters, whether we should bother putting them together or not.
I can start, definitely. You don't need to restate the whole paper. That's what the abstract is for, to help me get oriented. But sort of, I think the thing that the cover letter can do that no other part of the communication to do is explain the fit. This is why I chose this journal for this paper. That's really, really helpful. And if you go, I'll put in the chat in just a second, the manuscript submission guidelines for PSPR. But one thing also that we're asking people to do in the cover letters is describe the demographic characteristics of the authorship, since that's something that we're trying to track, and doing it in a self-reported way is vastly preferable to any other mode. So I'm always, when authors actually notice that and do that in the cover letter, it saves me a lot of time in our archival tracking work. But yes, I think articulating why this journal for this paper is really helpful, and it doesn't tend to show up anywhere else.
Do you agree, Margot and Michael?
Very much. Very much. I'm always like, oh my gosh, they didn't give a cover letter? Huh. Then I'm trying to figure out, you know, yeah, I would like them to make a strong case for why this journal.
I like cover letters that are one page. I don't want, I mean, for the initial submission, right? So, you know, say something about the topic. And well, the other thing that cover letters are very good for is that you can say reviewers that might be good reviewers. I mean, it doesn't mean that the editor is necessarily going to use them, but you can do that. You could also include people not to send papers to. And I mean, if someone says don't have this reviewed by these people, I would definitely honor that request. I definitely would. So
Building on that, can I just ask, I heard Lynn Cooper one time give an answer in a Q&A with editors that she thought it's really, really helpful and important for people to suggest reviewers, because it would give her a sense of who's your intended audience for this paper. What are you trying to do here? And I guess, can I ask all the editors, how do you feel about people requesting reviewers?
Yep, we definitely welcome it. It's really helpful, I think, for that particular reason, because it orients us to who you're trying to speak to. We definitely try to honor those requests. We don't only send it, of course, to people that are requested reviewers, but it's often a good place to start. So I think that's really helpful. It only works in your favor to recommend people.
I agree. I think it's a great idea to recommend people. I would go for a little bit of breadth. If I look at who's been recommended and I'm like, oh, well, those are all folks kind of like they run in the same circle. They just, you know, very like-minded, probably maybe at the same stage of career. You know, maybe I'll take one of them, but I'm going to look for somebody else as well. But if I look at that list and I'm like, you know, those are two great people. Yeah, I'll go ahead and send to those individuals.
I also add a comment as an author that, you know, who makes decisions as to which journal to submit. and as someone who does comparative work, myself and I know quite a few people that I work with, we actually look very carefully at the editorial board. And I think it was Michael or several of you mentioned that as well. You know, if there's a person who can value the work that you submit. So if we get the feeling that the journal doesn't really have anybody, especially at the decision, you know, handling editor level, doesn't really have anybody who has had experience working themselves in comparative ways or in multinational ways, then we can make the decision not to submit. So I think it's hugely important from the author's perspective, from the, you know, from the people who submit work to your journals, to see that representation. And we don't take it lightly, because it feels, sometimes it can feel as a waste of time. Well, if there's nobody that can actually value this work, why would we waste anybody's time? But I think, John, you also had a question maybe for the audience, because we also would like you to hear maybe from the people who are attending. Would you like to raise that question?
Sure. I mean, my question is a bookend to Lucy's very first question that got us rolling with Q&A, which is that I know that there are sometimes you know, systems and structures that either incentivize or disincentivize doing theoretical scholarship as opposed to empirical scholarship, right? We know that theory takes time, but it's also vital to the future of the field. So I would love to hear from anyone on the call about how we could more effectively incentivize people taking the time to really develop theory and pursue it in rigorous ways. So if anyone has thoughts on that, please let us know, especially if there are things that from our position as editing a theoretical journal, we might be able to incentivize.
Anyone who would like to give a response?
People need a minute to think about that. I could ask another really just practical question in the meantime, and people have some thoughts about that. I guess something I was thinking of asking too is going back to the top guidelines. There was some things came up earlier, but that's something else that working with colleagues in the majority world, especially I've been working with people in Africa. Also, this came up when I was in Malaysia. A lot of people in other countries, especially in the majority world countries, have not really heard about some of these new open science, for like the idea of pre-registration. They haven't heard about it yet. They haven't started doing it. And again, I guess it's kind of that question, how would you balance that as editors? I mean, I know SPSP, I think some of these open science practices are ultimately should benefit people throughout the world, because, you know, more things become accessible to more people. Certainly open access journals benefit people in countries that have different economies. But yeah, is there any, I guess it's the only concern I have with SPSP getting stricter about this, is that actually going to create, there's sort of a push to internationalize, but is there also like new barriers coming up as some of the old ones disappear?
I have a thought related to that I can start us out with. I think it's really important that training opportunities be provided. So SPSP really is pushing top 2 very heavily, really wants all of its journals, it's requiring almost to adopt those standards. And so a lot of training opportunity, and specifically targeting and reaching out to underrepresented populations and individuals who might not otherwise have the opportunity to learn about how to do these things. I would say, like, oh, I will just, you know, develop such workshops and offer them, right? You know, but I will say that the editor's load is tremendous for these journals. It's an insane, frankly, an insane amount of time. And so I would plead at the organizational level, that the training be offered, you know, and maybe online modules be offered, easy, accessible ways of learning about these practices and doing it.
Maybe that's something for Aisha and I to take back to the SPSP International Committee, and maybe also people at IACCP to be thinking about how is this impacting the membership. It looks like there's some responses about theory articles now in the chat.
Yep, I'm just trying to catch up with them. I was typing a response to Anna. So Anna asked about whether you could submit a proposal for a theory article to PSPR and have that considered sort of a registered report, but for a theory article. So the short answer is we don't do that right now. It actually is something that we discussed when we were first starting up as a way of reducing barriers to submission. But we just decided not to pursue it at this point. There are sort of, so as Margot said, there's a huge load of things to take on, and we had to prioritize them, and we've decided to really put our developmental efforts into cultivating the editorial pipeline, so providing developmental feedback on reviews that show up with every manuscript, for example. But it's certainly something that I'm thinking about. So I'll be interested to see how that continues to evolve. And then I haven't caught up with the other chat. Oh, Isa, you're saying that European Review of Social Psychology does do that for theoretical papers?
Yeah.
Okay, that's good to know. So I may reach out to them to find out. Thanks for letting me know.
Mm-hmm. I think their model is by invitation versus by
yes,
and proposal submission. Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
John, I mean, in terms of the question that you asked earlier, I don't know whether this will address that point, but from, again, a comparative point of view, especially for people that do bottom-up work, you know, who might have worked on a particular construct that is quite unique to a particular region, religion, you know, a particular cultural context. How that construct can be related or understood in the light of other constructs that have been studied previously. That personally, I see would probably make a very exciting theory paper. You know, how do these constructs go together? How are they unique? How do they connect to each other? What are some of the regional variations that are expected to be seen? So it's not, you know, with some empirical probably basis to begin with, but then reaching out to other theoretical pathways and constructs in the field, which would also help that more IMIC perspective to be then represented and recognized in the more mainstream literature, I think. Would that
Absolutely.
work? Would that work?
Oh, that would be wonderful. A lot of my empirical research these days focuses on people with acquired physical disabilities. Which is a very, you know, small group of people, and there are lots of interesting things to say about this particular group of people, but I'm also interested in the way their experiences of the change in their body relates to their change in identity, as it speaks to all kinds of, we all experience changes in our body that relate to changes in our identity. They're just not as often dramatic or extreme. So that general principle of here is a phenomenon that exists within a very bounded context, whether that's a global context or a cultural context or some other context, and here's how it opens up insights and helps us think about more general principles. Yes, please.
There's a long question in the chat from Alexander. Alexander, is there any way we could ask you to, I'm actually not able to read it. I don't have my glasses. Maybe someone else can, or would somebody, or Alexander, would you just be able to ask it out loud?
He's looking for his mic.
Yeah, sorry. I think you can probably hear me very badly right now because I'm using my inbound microphone. Does it still work?
Yes, we can still hear you.
Trying to get as close as possible to my laptop. But yeah, I was just thinking. I mean, maybe my question was more guided, kind of how we can foster more theory building in general, not only theory, I guess, theoretical articles over empirical articles. But yeah, I was just thinking. I mean, registered reports seem to be at least one step where we can shift the incentives kind of from the traditional model of publishing, where you run your study, you have the results, and then it's almost kind of like a how to say, kind of like a duel with the editors and reviewers, where you kind of try to make the point for your study and why you've done what you've done, and why that should be published. But yeah, since registered reports kind of like shift the attention away from the actual results and more kind of to the part of the whole work where we justify what we think will happen, why we think that is important. I guess that would be one way to shift kind of the incentive to people more to, to make that, to put more effort into that part instead of, kind of just I'm running the data and then I'm making sense of it. I mean, we're talking about, there's still a lot of instances of hacking, for example, that can be very detrimental to all of this. But I guess with the shift in incentive, that may be one way to kind of like at least make people more familiar and more incentivized in kind of putting more effort into the theory. That's at least, I don't know what I think. I heard from a lot of people that their experience with these registered reports, and they're still pretty rare, but from what I could hear, it seems to be much more of a collaborative effort, which is quite nice, because I guess you are being exposed to feedback by people that you might not have, you might not have asked somebody from a different field to look at your study and tell them, what do you think? Like, how should I do this? Is what I've done, what I think is my rationale sound? And yeah, it seems to be very collaborative, and I've heard a lot of good things about it, where kind of this collaborative effort instead of this versus between authors and editors has led to new kind of better articles and better theory, I guess. I don't know, it's just a bit of rambling, but I think
no, thank you for that thought, Alexander. It's the idea of doing sort of a registered report for theory is interesting. I think it would have to be a different form, because it's not on the editor's job to sort of come up with the theory for you, but we very much want to move from a duel to a dialogue in our editorial process. And indeed, unlike the other journals, we have pretty good turnaround times, but we think about theory as taking time. These are long articles. And so we tend to de-emphasize the speed and prioritize the sort of depth of engagement. So, I mean, this has been really fruitful. I will definitely, the associate editors and I are meeting in 2 weeks, and I will definitely take this conversation to them. So thank you all.
Thank you very much for your questions, and thank you, the editors, for joining us and sharing your thoughts and experiences. Very much appreciated. I'd like to leave the final word to Amber, who's going to say a few words before we finalize the session. Thank you all.
Yeah, my goal was to just wrap up what we talked about here today, and so I will just be very brief. I think that the summary of the introductions was that the times are changing, and some of these really high impact US journals really have it on their minds. They want more international submissions and more international samples, and so it's a moment of the door really being open to the cross-cultural researchers who are represented here in the IACCP. And there's probably also still challenges. There's still can be bias with different, even if the editors of different journals really have this on their mind, not all action editors will necessarily be thinking about it. So there's still challenges there. One of the points of having a session like this, and I can't say this is necessarily true for those of you who came, but in the US, when you have this bias, it means that when you're in the US, you're studying at a university there, these journals, top journals, have been publishing people from the US, and it means that you're likely to have mentors, people on your dissertation committee who've published in these journals and who just might, have good advice about things. Should you request reviewers? What should you write in your cover letter? Should you challenge or not? You're just likelier to have people in your network that have been in these editorial roles and have published in these journals and can give good advice. So one of the goals here is to try to get out to a more international audience and let people, be asking these questions in case you're coming from a country where people aren't, you don't have as many mentors in your network who have these experience. And so I think we touched on some of those kinds of things. I'll say also that, of course, everybody benefits from these things and things change. So we touched on some things about how theory articles, what to include, how to maybe when and how to make challenges to editors if you feel that you've had something to be biased. I know that I have personally written an appeal to a desk rejection. I've only done it once. I've gotten desk rejected many times. One time I made an appeal and that article did end up appearing in that high impact journal. So I know from personal experience also, this is something to do judiciously, but it's not something to avoid at all costs. It can really be the right thing sometimes. Yeah, and we talked about more details like that, cover letters, requesting reviewers. So I hope that all these things were helpful. I think also I'm coming out of here with the idea that one of the things that might, be more a barrier for people, especially from majority world countries, might be these new top guidelines. Open science, it's there for a reason. It's, there to be beneficial, but it could have some sort of unintended costs. And so I think it's something that organizations like SPSP and IACCP should really be thinking about how might that be differentially impacting people, and these ideas that like Margot shared about having some kind of education, consciousness raising about this that's happening at the organizational level. I think those are that's my summary of what we talked about. And I hope that this session just made editors seem accessible too. So if people have other questions, you know who to ask. So I think for me, that's all. I just want to really thank IACCP for scheduling this, giving us a whole hour and a half. I really want to thank the 3 editors for coming and making the time and being so open about this. Aisha for organizational efforts, and all of you for coming and joining us today.